Ladies and gentlemen, gamers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be diving into the recent co-development update, and I'll be giving my general thoughts and opinions on the multiplayer tech test. So let's dive in. I'll just say this real quick. I don't know if these are authentic Relic troops, but I would love to see an army men set for each faction in the game. I think that would be incredible. But anyways, let's continue.
Hey everyone, it's John from the Company of Heroes team. We want to thank everyone who played the recent Company of Heroes 3 multiplayer tech test. As always, community feedback has been fantastic. We received over 650 bug reports from players, and we've been keeping a close eye on the forums and our other community channels. All that feedback is directly helping us make the right adjustments, both for next month's launch, but also beyond that, as we get ready to support Company of Heroes 3 for years to come. We're going to recap how the tech test went, some of the
I actually think this is John's best work, and I believe Relic when they say that. I think they're doing a really great job of listening to the community, gauging, community sentiment overall. They can't please everybody, but they're actively listening and implementing a lot of the changes that we're requesting. So hats off to Relic for that.
The key learnings and how we're addressing issues raised by the community. First, let's talk about all things art related. One of the biggest topics of discussion really focused on the look, feel, and readability of the game right now. So the version of the game that we were using for the tech test was...
Okay, so this is the game that we played. This is the visual aesthetic. And overall, I would say that the best way I can describe this Tiger tank is that it was literally just produced at a toy factory and put on a shelf at Toys R Us. Like, this thing has been under the most pristine, detailed car wash imaginable. And I just don't think it fits within the overall theme of a World War II strategy game where these things are in, battle hardened in combat. And I just think it's a little bit offsetting. So happy that they're addressing this for sure.
Was about a month old, and a major lighting pass wasn't quite ready for it. But you'll see updated versions in our upcoming deep dives. We also
okay, fully weathered state. So this is the ultimate state, and I think it looks really good. You could see the wear and tear on the vehicle. You can see dust particles. You can see a slight discoloration and graying of the vehicle as well. The bunker looks great too. It's obviously under artillery fire or machine gun fire. It looks like it's been in war, So I think this is just a much better overall representation of World War II. And I don't know if you guys noticed this tank right here, but this wasn't in the multiplayer tech test. So it's very interesting. It's very peculiar that this is being shown right now, like a little Easter egg. But perhaps it's from a battle group that we just don't know yet. Maybe this is going to be a late game tank that you're able to access with the Wehrmacht. If anyone is wondering, this is a Nashorn. I believe in German, Nashorn means rhinoceros. So you can just see this thing kind of looks like a rhinoceros. Huge barrel and gun. It's very indicative of that animal. So it's funny how you have like the tiger, the panther, the rhinoceros, right? It's funny how they name these tanks, but pretty cool. And I believe and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is a Panzer IV chassis with a PaK 43. So I'm not completely sure. So, there's a lot of guys in my chat who are really, really good with technical understanding of these vehicles in the war. So I would love if someone could provide some feedback there. And also on the German name, rhinoceros. Is that a good translation? And if not, I would love some clarity on that. But I believe it's a PaK 43, 8.8 centimeter. I'm not completely sure. So, but overall, I think this tank was a highly mobile tank for its size. It was deemed an anti-tank gun, sort of like a tank sniper. It hit really hard and it moved well for its size, but it also lacked armor, from my understanding. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the late game. I'm assuming it's going to have less health, less armor, but it's going to pack a big punch and be able to knock out tanks from a distance. So really curious about this inclusion that they made.
Found 2 rendering and map bugs that were causing lighting shadow artifacts and missing terrain details, which contributed to degraded visuals. For some users, game scaling was also defaulting to a low...
Yeah, so we're going to look into this in a little more detail, but what a difference does that make? Wow.
setting, meaning they were seeing subpar resolutions and blurriness. Overall, these bugs had a sizable impact on the visual presentation during the tech test. The good news is we have most of these fixes internally already, and we look forward to showing you the game again closer to launch.
Okay, so that's great news that they're addressing this, that they knew this was a problem. I just wish that they released the tech test for people to play and see the game for the first time in a better state, because first impressions are really important. And I just feel like a lot of people were upset, and deservedly so, um, with something that they had already addressed and had already found a solution for. So I think this build is probably a couple months old at least. And I just wish that they were able to polish a couple of these things beforehand. So people who were on the fence, were convinced that this game was everything that it was cracked out to be. But anyways, they're addressing it, and I don't think it will be an issue moving forward.
What's more, we will be monitoring the impact that these changes will have, how they resonate with players, and what additional actions we can take post-launch. Some players raised concerns that CoH3 sound design didn't quite meet expectations. An important takeaway is that we found an issue where sound output quality was defaulting to low or medium for some players instead of to high, which would significantly degrade their audio experience. Also, initially, when we approached CoH3 sound design, it was with an emphasis on realism, with gunshots and explosions having more of a crack, whereas past Co titles had kind of that old school Hollywood kapow. However,
Okay, that makes sense, because I intuitively noticed in game when I was playing, I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but the sound was a little bit off to me. And especially with the MG teams, when the MG team first shot off, it sounds exactly like what John is saying. It was like a really powerful crack, and then it just tailored off into this muffled sound. So it sounded pretty good at first, and then it just got progressively worse. And I think the MG team needs a lot of rework. I think grenades sound pretty lackluster, and also the graphical. There's some graphical issues with grenades as well. They're a little bit laggy. The input behind them is not great, so I think that needs some work. And I think the vehicles in general needed reworks, especially the tanks. The Co franchise, I mean, every Co game is known for its sound. I mean, you could hear tanks maneuvering, you could hear the engines rumbling, you could hear them running over certain terrain. And that was like non-existent in this game. So I'm happy to see that they're working on audio.
we've heard you, and the team is reworking and optimizing several audio effects, including cannons, machine guns, explosions, off-map artillery, and more to give them that heavy impact. Not only that, but we're also planning to completely remix the audio for all of our tanks at launch. This was
That's absolutely huge. Hats off to Relic for doing that. It's a lot of work within a 4 to 5 week time frame, but that's amazing to see.
a tech test after all, so we want to briefly touch on some technical items. We had over 4 times our initial estimate of players take part in the tech test, which was really fantastic to see. Our average gameplay latency or matchmaking times were both lower than our targets. We were able to test over 1,400 different types of hardware in a ton of different configurations, and we found and fixed several crashes related to configurations, rendering, and game mechanics. A key callout is that certain GPU models that were slightly older were experiencing worse performance than they really should have been getting. The tech test has helped us get ahead of this early and get to work on the solutions for launch. Overall, performance during the tech test really hit our target. Our first hotfix during the tech test cut our crash rate by 1/3. What's more, we have great data to help us work on reducing the crash rate even further for launch. Finally, there was a bunch of other great feedback on other areas. Some examples include WASD controls, custom keybinds, additional camera settings, and other systems. While overall players seemed to really enjoy the gameplay, we heard great balance and design related feedback too. Rest assured, we're taking all that feedback.
Their balance and design is very impressive to me. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I was very impressed by their faction design and their balance so far. There's issues, of course, especially early on, but overall, I think they did a great job in terms of gameplay.
On board, and we will be addressing these areas in our post-launch plans. Thanks again for being a part of the co-development process, and keep the feedback coming. It really does help us prioritize and continue improving this game and franchise that we all love so much. Thanks so much, and we'll see you at launch.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive in and look at this lighting, these changes a little bit closer. Overall, I would say that the final effect here is good. It could still use some work aside from weathered states, like combat and the dynamic changes in a unit over time after it's been hit and so forth. But overall, this is fantastic. This, guys, of course, looks very blurry, and I think sand is. I'm not an artist, but I think sand is very hard to do. Especially look at this unit. This unit is so hard to read and see on the map. It just blends right in with the terrain, which is good for combat and real war, right? I mean, you want to blend in with your terrain, but it's too blurry for the game, and everything just kind of looks blended here. If you look at the after effect, they've added this strip, this airplane strip here. They've added more detail, contrast, and lighting is just so much better. Look how it just makes everything pop out, right? Everything is more visible. And I just think this looks fantastic. To me, this looks really good. So I'm happy to see that. Here, same thing. It's very blurry. And here it looks better, although I still think this could use some work, especially with some of the trees and so forth. But guys, the important thing to note is that people are saying, oh, this game does not look good enough relative to CoH3 for a game that's 17 years old versus a game that's in 2023. But here's the thing. You don't want a game to be insane graphics without consideration for readability, clarity, and performance. Like, those things are really important. And what's more important to me than like insane graphics is iconic graphics. Like, look at StarCraft 1 versus StarCraft 2. In my opinion, I actually enjoy watching StarCraft 1 remastered more than StarCraft 2 because there's something iconic and very clear, the clarity of the units and the engagements, that's very simple and easy to watch. Maybe that's me. I've been playing the game since I was 12 years old, so I'm probably biased. But I think there's something to be said for style and overall readability versus just beautiful graphics. And I'm probably getting muddled in semantics here, but you guys know what I mean. I think it's very important for them to get that Company of Heroes 1 graphic style with a modern, updated 2023 polish, if that makes sense. So anyways, very happy they're working on the audio and visuals, but I want to talk about my general thoughts on the overall tech test. And I have this PowerPoint. It's a very simple PowerPoint. It's just going to be basically diving into the factions. So guys, overall, I want to start with this. I think the faction design is top notch, like truly, truly top notch. And I think the gameplay mechanics are fantastic. I think they exceeded expectations by far with this. So very happy about these factions. They're launching with more factions than they ever did in previous Company of Heroes games. And it's not an easy thing to do, to balance these 4 factions at the very beginning, at the complexity and comprehensiveness of them, of the way they're designed. So I'm so impressed. I'm looking forward to the battle groups because they're only going to enhance each of these factions. And I just want to jump into each of them very quickly, and from weakest to strongest, in my opinion. And now here's the thing. I only got to play for 4 days, and I only got to play like 15 games at max, like 10 to 15 games. And I didn't really get a chance to play the Africa Corps and the British too much. And I don't know enough. I haven't played enough to really give my opinion on the strength of each faction and the overall balance and so forth. But just give my general thoughts real quick. I think the British faction was the weakest, personally. Not the least fun to play. I think they were really fun to play. I think they're really interesting. But overall, I think they were the weakest faction, and I think they were a little bit expensive. Map control was a little more difficult with them, it seemed. I think they don't necessarily have as many options as some of the other factions, especially early on. But overall, I think it's a good step in the right direction. The British seemed the most similar to the British in CoH3 or previous Company of Heroes games, although they don't have that same ability to set up emplacements that they did in CoH3, which overall I think is a good thing. I didn't care for SimCity and so forth. But I'm very curious how battle groups in particular are going to enhance the British. One thing that's interesting about the British to me was all of their infantry, for the most part, other than battle groups, of course, is available pretty early on. And there's not that many tech paths, different tech path choices or build order choices you're going to have to make. You pretty much have the base early on between tier 0 and tier 1. So I don't know if they're going to add another unit in tier 2 or tier 3 in the future, but that's something to look out for. Okay, moving on to the Wehrmacht. I thought this would be my favorite faction, but the Wehrmacht was, although it was awesome, I really enjoy the Wehrmacht since CoH1. It's been my favorite. But I will say that it was lacking something. I don't know exactly what they're lacking, but there's something missing that I think they'll sharpen over time, that they'll get right. But here's the thing about the Wehrmacht that was pretty cool. What I loved about them is if you look at the tiers, tier 2A and tier 2B, they have a mix of units across each tier that cover multiple bases of counters, right? And multiple styles of play. So if you go from tier 0, of course, to tier 1, you have your infantry base here set up. Let's say you have a pioneer, your Kettenkrad, an MG, a sniper, and some grenadiers, right? Let's say you decide from there to go straight into tier 2A. Okay, obviously that's immediately gonna nullify you from tier 2B, which are all of these vehicles you see here and weaponry, and the Jaeger squad. But it's not like there's only anti-tank in tier 2B and there's only infantry and artillery in tier 2A. Whatever tier you go, you're going to have access to the tools you need for multiple scenarios, whether it's artillery, whether it's anti-tank or infantry support and so forth. So I love the idea of being able to choose a tier early and not being locked completely into one style or specific setting. So, and then you can backtech. You can go to tier 2B. Let's say you can get a really fast whirlwind, put on a lot of pressure, and then you can backtech and grab a Nebelwerfer, for example, or a pack gun if your opponent is going heavily on armor. So I really love the way that the tech tree is structured for the Wehrmacht. In terms of design and balance, I just haven't played enough to really give a strong opinion. One thing I will say is the Kettenkrad could use a little work. I love the Jeep in the USF. We'll get into that. The Kettenkrad felt great in terms of its first ability, communication cables, where you can capture points, and that could scale into the game because you have more resources with these captured points by the Kettenkrad. But it didn't have any utility outside of that, and it just felt like it was kind of driving around idly, not doing anything for a lot of the time, especially when the game was at a stalemate. So I would love some utility and reason to have this into the later game. Maybe with veterancy, you unlock more abilities, a scouting ability or a weapon, or the ability to lay mines, I think would be fantastic. Or even repairs, some kind of mobile repair unit, something. There's a lot of things they could do, but I would like to see this idea built upon for the Kettenkrad. Okay, moving on to my favorite faction. Now, USF was never really my favorite faction in the past, but for Company of Heroes 3, I absolutely love this unit. This faction, I'm sorry. This faction felt so good to play on multiple levels. I think they nailed the tech tree design. Very similar to CoH1 and the Wehrmacht. They kind of mixed this idea of the CoH1 US forces and the Wehrmacht design philosophy into the US faction. And I just love the way that they structured everything from tier 0, which is your immediate choice between a scout squad and a engineer squad, right? Both of them have different implications, different utility. Both of them scale into the game differently. And to be honest, both of them have a lot of purpose in the game. So you're probably going to use both of these units. And you have a scout squad to start with instead of a rifleman squad or a engineer squad. So Really interesting. I love how you have these centers: air support center, mechanized center, or infantry support center, because these upgrades are how you tech to the next tier, but they also provide their own abilities. So your incentive and your reasoning for choosing a tech tier also has different implications in terms of their utility, which I think is a great addition to the game and to the faction. Um, I love the Jeep, this truck right here from the barracks in Tier 1A. I thought this unit was just fantastic. So much utility. It was very, very fun to use. And I just think it's a great addition to the rifleman squad and to the motor team. Um, I love how the motor team is in Tier 1A and not in the support center. Although many people would say, okay, like why isn't the motor team in Tier 1B? Because that's a support unit. But I like how they're not, like, once again, like the Wehrmacht, they're not completely locking you out of a unit category based on your tech tier. So in the previous games, if you know Co 1, if you go, let's say Tier 1B, you'd have an MG, a sniper, a motor, right? For example. And you're completely, if you go Tier 1A, you're completely locked out of those support units. But now it's a little bit mixed, right? You can go Tier 1A and you have your rifleman, a truck, and a motor to support you against enemy MGs, enemy fixed emplacements, and so forth. So you could once again go from Tier 0 to Tier 1A to Tier 1B, and you can get the full gambit of American infantry. But I just love the different build order infrastructure in the game. I think the game in general, the design philosophy is geared more towards stronger build orders and more emphasis on strategy and the tech tree that you decide to choose in the game. I think compared to Code 2, it just blows it out of the water. I'm so impressed by it, and I'm very happy about the faction design. And last but certainly not least is the Africa Corps. I think this was a fan favorite, and for good reason. The faction is extremely well designed by Relic, and also very strong, it seemed. I'm going to pass judgment on balance. I just don't know enough yet. But overall, the faction is mobile, hard-hitting, armor, mechanized, that is. A lot of interesting upgrades for the mechanized style of play. I love the idea of having 4 units in Tier 0. It's much different than the other factions, for example, which I think is unique and very cool to play. I love the idea of having Tier 1 have a tier within a tier, so you can purchase Tier 1 and then purchase another upgrade to unlock more units within that tier. Or you can say, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go straight from Tier 0 to Tier 1, grab an MG, or let's say a medical truck, for example, an assault grenadier if you need, whatever, and then move straight to Tier 2, right, quickly. Let's say you want to beeline from Tier 0 to Tier 1 straight for a Martyr 3 for whatever reason, who knows. I love this idea because you have all of these options within each tier. You can unpack each one of them. And then you have your battle groups, which enhance each tier at different levels, at different times, based on different sequences of your teching. So just so many different options. It's such a dynamic faction. I like the mechanized style of play, and I think this is going to be a fan favorite for a long time. I'm really curious to see how they continue to balance these factions. A lot of people love the Italian battle groups and the Italian addition to the game, and a lot of other people are saying, hey, like, you can keep these Italian battle groups, but let's come out with an Italian faction, a standalone faction on their own in the future expansions for the Axis. So I'm kind of torn on that. I would love to see an Italian faction in the Axis in the future. I think that would be very cool, because historically the Italians were their own army. I mean, Mussolini was trying to resurrect the Roman Empire, and he was in his own campaign across the Mediterranean trying to accomplish that vision. And he didn't really join the Axis officially, join the Germans officially, until they occupied France, right, in about 1943-ish, somewhere along that timeline. So, of course, they were working together in North Africa, and that's where the DAC come in. And I think it's so cool to have that historical reference, and it does have that overall North Africa feel. So very cool to see. I come from the StarCraft background. I've played that game most of my life, and I've played many RTS games over the past, 2 decades. And I've seen companies come and go in this genre. This is a genre that was very popular in the 90s, and in recent decades it's lost a lot of interest and popularity, but it's starting to come back. And I've seen so many companies come and go, and I will say that from what I've seen so far with Relic, this is the most invested I've been in Company of Heroes in a long time. Um, and I'm just so excited about the overall performance by Relic. I think they did a great job. I think they have a lot of polish to do still. I think a big part of that is that they're spread a little bit thin. They were working on Age of Empires 4. They built a completely new engine, and they're tasked with this mandate of releasing the most dynamic campaign they've ever done before. It's the largest campaign, 2 campaigns at launch. They're tasked with making this game not only on PC but console, which has its own design implications across the board, right? 4 factions for multiplayer. Who knows? They might even be releasing this game for iPad. So there's a lot of things that they're trying to balance and juggle. I think if they could have a little more time, they'd be able to polish it perfectly. But I want to say this: I think the most important thing, and a little story time here, okay? A little story time that will help kind of capture my point. StarCraft 1 was an amazing game, and it absolutely blew up esports all over across the globe, but first in Korea. And at the time, the West was not really big into esports, and StarCraft really helped build the esport infrastructure and popularity leading into League of Legends and other games that we know today that are very popular. But the issue was when Blizzard Entertainment saw the popularity of StarCraft 1 and decided to do StarCraft 2, they made StarCraft 2 a completely different game in all respects. I mean, it was much, much different. And what it did was it polarized the community. It split the community in half, much like Company of Heroes 1 and Company of Heroes 2. They have different communities. And Relic is tasked with the same problem of, okay, we have CoH3, which was the highest rated strategy game of all time. It was the pinnacle of RTS gaming for its time, right? It completely revolutionized the genre and the franchise and so forth. They had that strong legacy that they want to live up to. And then CoH2 was a failure in many respects. They were going through issues from a financial standpoint, the bankruptcies and everything. And Sega came and bought them and really helped revitalize CoH2. And although it had a very shaky start, it became a very well-polished game. But they still have that issue of a divided community, just like StarCraft. And for CoH3, they're really trying, you can see it in the graphical design, you can see it in the faction design. They're really trying to bring both communities together, and it's a very hard thing to do. But I see it in their design decisions, and I think it's very important what they're doing, because the most important thing is to build a game that's authentic to the series, that performs really well, and doesn't polarize the communities too much. You don't want to just reinvent the wheel completely. So I'm very excited about their design choice, because the game is iconic. It reminds me of CoH1. It doesn't have these like absolutely insane graphics, top end graphics, but honestly, I prefer a game that's very snappy. And what I mean by snappy, we're going to have another story time here, story 2.0. The StarCraft team who left StarCraft 2, they left because Activision bought Blizzard, and then Microsoft bought Activision, and the StarCraft team stopped really developing the RTS genre for Blizzard. They stopped developing and innovating in it, and they wanted to create a new game and have a spiritual successor to StarCraft, because they didn't want to be limited by the management at Blizzard Entertainment. So they left. This is the core StarCraft 2 team. One of the coders or engineers, programmers, who was the architect behind the engine for StarCraft, amazing engine. He left, and he helped them create Frost Giant Studios. And now Frost Giant Studios, for the past 3 years, has been developing a new RTS game called Stormgate. And this is, as they put it, the spiritual successor to StarCraft in general. And that's a tall order to live up to. But a lot of the feedback from alpha testers, prominent StarCraft players in the community, are just positive remarks about the engine, how fluid and smooth the engine is in general. And that's the most important thing for a game, more than the graphical polish for like Company of Heroes, for example. More important is the responsiveness of the units. There shouldn't be input delay. You should be able to move a unit and immediately hit the stop button, and it should stop on a dime. It should be fluid, smooth. That's what keeps players coming back. That's what makes a game feel great and makes a game competitive. I think it would be a mistake not to make this the most competitive game in the series. And for me, polish and lighting and graphics, all those things can come with time, but the engine is so important. So I really hope that they focus on making the game snappy and responsive and quick. But overall, guys, I am extremely optimistic. I'm very grateful for the people in the community who are very pessimistic or very critical, because they keep Relic honest. They bring things to attention and help Relic prioritize certain things. And I think that's important to have. We need both. We need a balance in the community. So overall, guys, I'm very excited. I can't wait to put on more content and play more games. I want to thank everybody for supporting me for these past couple months since I started this channel. This is my passion, RTS gaming, and Company of Heroes is probably my favorite franchise of all time. So I'm so excited to be producing content, to be gaming with you guys, and I really want to invest in this community, the Sarge Squad, you guys, to help us become the best strategy gamers we can be. And I have a lot of fun ideas in the future. I want to compete in tournaments as a group, like with you guys, and do some fun events and activities. And so I'm just very much looking forward to what the future holds for Co. And once again, I just want to thank everybody. If you guys can smash the like button. It goes a long way in helping me as a new channel. Subscribe if you haven't before, and look forward to producing more content in the days to come.